Hello.
Hey there, Troy. It's been a bit.
It has. I missed you guys. I'm gonna just stay off camera while I eat leftover spaghetti for lunch. But then I'll come on camera and you can tell me if you have any spaghetti sauce on my face.
Certainly one approach for mirrors.
I'm known for going into the Zoom video settings ahead of time to check and make sure it's got all the screens set up right, because sometimes it decides that my shirt is the green screen for the day and makes me a disembodied head.
That's my favorite when that happens, actually.
So we don't at last check. Yeah, 0 agenda today, so today might be a quick one. You might be able to eat your entire spaghetti and not have to go on video.
Is this a challenge for how fast I can eat spaghetti? Is
Or
challenge
slow.
accepted. Okay, fair point.
You can just slow walk it right to the end of the meeting.
Just savor the spaghetti. It's a weird thing to say on a recorded call. Anyway.
I will note that day old or 2 day old spaghetti is usually better than the original because it's had a chance for all the sauce to really get into the noodles.
Yeah, I fully agree.
It's like spaghetti and pizza.
Yeah. Potato salad also is like that. You want to eat potato salad, I think, on the next day.
Yep.
If we don't have any agenda topics, maybe Carmi and I could just swap recipes.
I have a great spaghetti recipe. I have a spaghetti sauce recipe that I got from my mom. It's really easy.
Aw.
And what I love about it is um, I can make it as a meat sauce or a vegetarian sauce. So I use the same recipe for lasagna. And if I'm using cheese stuff in lasagna, then I make it as a non-meat sauce and it's awesome.
On the actual topic of OCI related activities, um, I don't have too much to report. We have our agenda up for Container Filming Days. It looks really great. Just trying to watch for folks who may, we always have one or two on any given track, people who end up having to withdraw for whatever reason. So trying to cultivate backup plans in the case that people can't make it. And I'll plan. I'm planning to be there so I can help facilitate slash MC and all that kind of stuff that day among the attendees. But we're kind of good to go there. Appreciate everybody's promotion, if you don't mind sharing, spreading the word, so that people in Europe know that we've got this event happening as part of the EU summit. Uh, yeah, that's it.
Is OCI pushing some of that out on their social medias as well?
Um, I believe so. I have to actually make sure that that is all wired up in the the social tool, which is HubSpot, which is not a great social tool. But yeah.
I'm trying to remember. Is there a Mastodon feed over there? I feel like there might be. If not, I share whatever I can find. And I will broadcast this one. Drop a link over in the Slack channel and I'll broadcast that out. All right. think I caught you with your mouth full of noodles there. So other
You
topics I'm sorry,
you
what was that,
did.
Joy?
You did. I don't know if there's a Mastodon, so I can check on that.
Oh, of all the embarrassing situations there. Um, Derek, question for you on the registry proxying stuff. I know we had gone back and forth a little bit on that PR. Is there any further you're looking at to clarify for me, or are you just mulling that one around in the head and trying to debate whether another header makes sense?
I stated my position on it. I don't think it makes sense.
So you're not a fan of that. Okay.
I mean, I don't think it's like, as I said, from the client perspective, having the header or not having a header, I don't think that the client can respond much to it, which makes it not worthwhile to even define.
So the scenario I laid out doesn't apply to anything you're thinking of,
I
or you're
don't,
thinking nobody should even bother doing what I was laying out.
the case where users don't know whether or not they're talking to a registry that supports the proxy at all, and potentially registries just ignoring it and returning the wrong values is, I'm not really worried. I don't worry about those type of misconfiguration cases. It's a very deliberate functionality from my perspective.
You've never had a user misconfigure a client?
I've never taken responsibility for that. Just point to the
Yeah.
docs.
Yeah, the direction I'm thinking of is I feel like there are going to be people that set a default proxy and they might actually want the default proxy to work for the places where it does work. Like they might have a scenario where they've got this converging proxy that pulls in all kinds of content from different registries. And in cases where that does work, they might like that and want to have that, but it just doesn't support the actual namespace header. And so I feel like there's that intermediate state where because there are proxies that can do that and cannot really support the namespace, but can still be used as if they did almost, it puts us in this weird intermediate scenario.
I guess it really depends there, because there's two types of proxies. For the users who just want a very transparent proxy, you basically just use HTTP proxying and you're good to go. The case where this applies specifically is when the client is talking, it knows it's talking to a different registry, and the host header that's going to get sent is going to be related to the registry that you're talking to. So unlike an HTTP proxy where the host header might not or would not change, in this case, the host header would differ from what's being sent. And in that case, it's a very deliberate configuration to set that up. So in the case where a user is talking or configures that to a registry that knows nothing about multiple namespaces, and they get a response that's from a single namespace, well, they're going to quickly find that they don't have a configuration that works for them. And the registry expecting the registry to come back and say, hey, I don't have this, or the registry, I mean, it's not really like a fail case, because like if the registry knows about this header, then it should just return a 404. It shouldn't come back and say, hey, I have content from a different namespace. It should just 404. In the case where a registry doesn't support it, well, then it doesn't have the header at all. So you're saying like, oh, if you don't get this header, then you basically you just have to you can't use this feature unless you have that header. Like the client has to error if it doesn't have that header.
So I know there are a lot of users out there who have configured the proxy in, say, their Docker engine, that they go in there, set their registry mirror up in there and say, I want to use this proxy server as my mirror. and they start pulling up all the images from whatever registry they want to pull from. They're pulling stuff. And that registry mirror only works for Docker Hub. It's the only configuration that works for. But they don't actually know that it's broken. They never have seen that it's broken because Docker transparently, well, A, it just goes up to the upstream registry. But B, if they ever pulled something from there and the proxy didn't work, it's going to fall back and pull straight to Docker Hub. It's got that transparent fallback in there where if something goes wrong, it just falls through. So the only time this could ever go wrong is if the proxy decides today, hey, I do know how to answer this, and it gives them an answer, and that answer may or may not be right. And the user doesn't know they misconfigured their client.
Yeah, but we're talking about a new configuration here where I configured a mirror for Docker Hub, and now I say, okay, no, actually, this is a mirror for everything. Because if the registry knows about it, the registry already has the correct response in mind, which is 404. It's not to return content for a different namespace.
At which point the client would fall back and go wherever it's going to go to.
Yeah, that's how
But
it's
we're
supposed to work.
assuming the proxy that they configured for this knows how to use that namespace parameter. I can't make that assumption.
You cannot make as an assumption that the registry knows how to do it. Yes. You should only set that to a registry you know supports it.
How do I know when to set the namespace parameter from the client side?
How do you know when to set the namespace parameter or to configure a registry to use it?
How do I know when to set the parameter and when to trust that the registry used that parameter?
On the client side, you just always set the parameter if the host name doesn't match the namespace of the image that you're requesting.
And you're throwing terms in there. I think it's whenever you're talking to a proxy, right?
I mean, we do it all the time on Containerd. You don't have to be talking to you don't have to be talking to a proxy. It's just whenever it doesn't match, we include that. Like the proxy, it doesn't, not necessarily a proxy. It could just be you just want to use a different backend, but we always include that if it doesn't match.
You want to use a different backend. I'm trying to understand the scenario. When would you talk to one registry would be pulling an image from a different registry?
Well, so the case of like you mentioned the Docker Hub one, there are cases where you don't set, say, Artifactory as a mirror, you set it as the only source for Docker Hub. So whenever you do Docker IO, you don't fall back necessarily to Docker IO, you're only going to some internal backend. In that case, we are going to always set the namespace parameter because the namespace parameter is just intended to fill in information that is lost by changing the host parameter or the host HTTP header.
Okay, I guess in my scenario, I would still call that a proxy.
Sure, but I'm saying there's so many different scenarios that a user can configure. Like, sure, it can be a proxy, it could be an overwrite, it could be a mirror, whatever the difference between is. There could just be an HTTP proxy, and it could be completely transparent as well. So, like, there's a whole host of options here, and then the namespace one's not necessarily trying to prescribe how that's done. It's only trying to fill in the information that's missing in the HTTP request, because right now we're throwing information out.
So from the registry side, whether it's a pull-through proxy or a mirror, I get there are different scenarios there. From the client side, if I am pulling to this one server and it's not the registry that I have named the image for, it's a different thing. I've just always been calling that a proxy. Maybe we're just debating terminology and that's not a big deal.
Yeah, you can call it a proxy. I was just saying from the perspective of like, not everybody proxies the requests. Like some people use it as like a hard override. But yeah, I mean, from the client perspective, it can be looked at as a proxy.
Yeah, and so for me, if I am pulling content from a proxy, I'm just kind of curious what the scenario is. When do I know that I should trust that content from that proxy to be looking at that namespace parameter, to be using that? And yeah, the thought there is just that I feel like there are different servers out there and there are different client configurations out there. There are potentially broken client configurations. There could be perfectly valid client configurations where they just want to send all requests to this one server they've got in-house. But that one server in-house doesn't really know the stuff that it should know. It's just a manual bunch of stuff that's been copied in there manually, and it might have the image, it might not. And so everything needs to fall through to somewhere else afterwards. There are lots of different scenarios out there, and I'm just trying to figure out, is there a way to implement this that from the client side I can be able to identify, okay, that's just a random server that I'm sending all these requests to, and unless they told me specifically to send every request for this one registry to that one proxy, I should probably double check this. I should verify this tag to this digest. And then if the proxy has all the content addressable data in there, all the manifest by digest, all the blobs by digest, sure, I'll pull it from there. That'll speed everything up. Everybody's happy.
I mean, we already have, I guess in Containerd, we have a slightly different, we have all that functionality, but it's all on the client side configuration. Like when you configure a specific proxy, you can tell it what you trust it to do. So we actually have separate permissions for resolve versus just fetch. So if you configure a mirror to fetch content, it's only going to fetch content by digest. But if you configure it to resolve, then it will actually allow taking a tag and resolving that to the digest. But we have separate permissions for that you can configure on a per endpoint basis. So in Containerd today, you can already do that. You can already say, I want to use this mirror or this proxy, but only for content. Do not resolve it. So you can put a hub mirror that you don't trust in there. You don't trust, but maybe it's fast, and it will go to Docker Hub to do the resolve of the tag into the digest, and then all the requests that are by digest can go to a mirror proxy at that point.
Does Containerd have the option to set a global default proxy for every request?
Yes, we have. It's like you can there's like a specific default configuration you can use that will override it.
Because that's the only scenario I'm worried about. If the user specifically said for this one registry, go to this one proxy, fine, the user told me to do that, I'm sending everything over there. It's only the case where they told me, I've got this default, use this default proxy for everything, and I'm sending this request to this one proxy server, and I don't know if that proxy server can handle those requests that I'm sending it.
I mean,
Yeah.
it's definitely a case where you really have to know what you're doing if you're configuring that. I can show you the configuration we have for it. It's not something we heavily advertise, but it is something that users have requested.
I think that's kind of the thing, is that the users that are setting this up in Containerd probably know what they're doing. And I'm looking at how this gets expanded to more and more users. Like, what if the new Docker configuration just changes the definition of that registry mirror to apply to everything, instead of it just being a Docker Hub setting?
Then that'd be really dumb, but I understand your point.
As a user, if I configured my runtime to pull everything from a single proxy, it would be extremely surprising behavior to me if it decided that that proxy was not fit for purpose and pulled directly from the origin instead.
I would just be resolving the content addressable stuff, the non-content addressable stuff. I would just be saying, give me this tag.
Yes, but if I've configured it explicitly to use a specific proxy for all requests, that would be surprising behavior.
See, for me, I'm worried that the user's going to do that. They're going to get their 5 registry servers working just fine. And then one day they're going to load up a configuration that says, go to this other popular registry server that nobody configured your default to mirror to. And the default proxy is going to be like, sorry, that content over there. I've just got these 5 registries I know to pull from that I've merged everything from. And oh, by the way, I happen to find this over on some other popular registry server. Someone registered this thing over on Quay. And I'll pull it down from there.
Yes, that would be unfortunate, but that is the explicit configuration that I requested of my runtime. That's what I asked it to do, so it would be surprising for it to do something else.
I'm taking a different default stance here. I get where you're coming from. I'm just taking a different default stance. So I'm going in a slightly different direction.
Like the counter argument here would be to have a separate setting in the runtime to make it always resolve things like tags with the origin. Because if you're worried about that and you're willing to resolve with the origin, then you should always resolve with the origin and then only do the fetch from the proxy.
Yeah, I'm only worried about tags when it's talking to a registry that can be like that JFrog example. Like if I didn't see a JFrog example, I wouldn't have been throwing a fuss. But when they decided they wanted to start merging multiple registries together, that got me nervous.
I linked the containerd setting that you can use for this, although I am not sure if we have what you're saying in this case where I say a host, if it still tries the origin. I think it will, but I have to test. I don't know if we have a test for that specifically. Like if I want to say
Try from registryexample.com and then fall back.
yeah, don't resolve, basically only resolve to the origin, but you always use this registry. I don't think that's how the original folks who wanted this feature, how they asked for it, but that's that default one is how it's intended to work. And it only goes to default if there's not a more explicit configuration. It doesn't merge the configurations. So yeah, I mean, there's yeah, I'm not sure in that case because like, yeah, you could want to use it just for pull, but not for resolve.
I'm also crazy enough to want to push through proxy, not just a pull through proxy.
We do have support for push. There is a push capability, but it's the push one's tricky because like, how do you interpret a push? Like push all or push first? Like how does the fallback scenario work? If it's push all, like is it succeeded when it has succeeded pushing to any one? So there's a lot more potential functionality there, I guess. But yeah, mostly we have the capabilities there, so we don't end up sending requests to servers, or you can be more explicit about what you trust that server to do.
So the resolve capability, I'm looking at that. Is that resolving tags? Is that what that means?
Yeah, resolving tags.
Okay. Oh, we talked too slow, or Jory just really enjoyed that spaghetti.
Favored it, man.
Yes,
I do
think you've just...
I do love how our meetings always start up with like, oh, we don't really have too much to discuss, and then like actually expand into something like really like fruitful.
We're just in a deep, respectful disagreement with each other. And I don't know if or how either of us are going to convince the others of different view, but I might be the only person that cares about this. So that might be the easy answer.
Well, I guess, yeah, I'm coming at it from a perspective of if we were to add a header how we could enforce that header. And a header that's not enforced, does it provide any value? Like we could certainly define a header as informational, but if you're talking about adding a header as like, oh, if I don't have this header, I should fail. What like that's kind of where I'm getting at. Like, what do you do if you
So-
don't have that header?
So I am looking at this from the spec side of adding it to the spec as just informational. It's up to the client receiving it and the client configuration as to whether they want to do something with it. And then from my side, writing a client, I'm thinking of there are scenarios where I might want to see that response and say, you know what, I resolve this content because I do my resolves automatically. I don't have the capability to switch resolve versus pull and all that kind of stuff. Since I'm doing that, if the resolve comes back and it looks funny to me, I'm going to say, you know what, let me not do the resolve to this registry. Let me do the resolve to the upstream origin.
You could. I mean, yeah, I'm not opposed to that as a piece of information that a client can use, only as a must information there, if that makes sense. Because
Yeah,
take
in no way am I saying that we're enforcing clients must use this new header and implement it in a certain way. This is strictly, you know, when I wrote it down, I specifically said, you know, I think tools can use this different ways, and there are multiple scenarios in my bulleted list where I just completely ignore it.
Sure. I mean, I don't have a problem with that. I think we can add that as a follow-up though, as it's not a requirement to use it in order to use that specific header or to use that specific query parameter.
Yeah, for me, it tells me that this registry implements the namespace.
Ooh,
'Cause-
see, that's where it's tricky because it tells you that it does implement it, but not having it doesn't tell you that it doesn't implement it. And
Correct.
that's where I don't think it's a requirement to get it in for that PR.
Yeah, it tells me that it does have it. Doesn't tell me it doesn't. There are going to be multiple registries out there that are written long ago that don't have it. But it gives me the way of knowing for sure if I see it that, okay, I can trust that this registry actually implemented that feature.
So if I give a registry that namespace header for the exact same as host, am I expecting that a registry will understand it and return a header to say, this is what I'm returning something from?
It would be the exact same value of NS, just in a header back to the client. It says, hey, I saw your NS. I gave it to you.
Yeah, I don't have a problem with that as informational. I don't want to include it in that PR though.
Separate PR. I think we found a medium point there. Mid ground is good
Yeah.
enough.
Yeah, I was mostly worried about it as a putting language in the spec that indicates that a registry that supports names, or basically if a registry is returning something other than the namespace that matches the host, that it must include that header. Otherwise, a client is going to consider it a invalid response.
I would say that the language that I'm thinking of is that a registry that supports the namespace parameter, because we got a lot of maze in there right now, which makes perfect sense. So I'm pulling this up so I'm reading the right language. We say that a proxy registry may use the namespace parameter. The phrasing I'm thinking of is that a registry that does support the namespace parameter should set this header to the value of the namespace parameter that it used.
Yeah, I'm fine with that.
And then that's it. We don't say how clients use it. We just say that a registry, if you got this, you should put that header on there and send it back.
Yeah, I think that's fine. I don't actually maintain an implementation of this, so some of the other folks on that thread seem to be using it. So yeah, I think they probably have a better take on how it's currently being used, and I don't think that would be such a problem for them if it's a should.
I mean, right now it's a may that registries that a proxy may use that query parameter at all, and so who knows what the proxy is sending back.
Yeah, and the unsaid part of this PR that there was some proposals years ago before this was open that kind of prompted it that I really didn't like. That was I don't know if you remember those PRs that basically add weird regex rules to the configurations to try to like inject the host name into various parts of the into the path. So I was never a fan of those. That's why I didn't want to include those, but I know there's some folks today doing something similar to that.
I was going to say, I know that there are registry servers that implement their proxies that way. They put it in the repo prefix.
Yeah. And I mean, Containerd has support for that, but not generically. You could, on a per namespace basis, add it. But this allows a more generic solution without weird regex rules being required or configured.
Sounds good to me.
Cool.
I was putting this in the notes so we actually talked about it since we chatted about it for this long. All right, so if I put a review item there with the actual verbiage that I wanted to add, you would be like, nope, not this PR. And then I'd have to open a separate PR on top of this.
I would say I prefer separate PR on top of it because I want you to make that separate PR since you have a better idea of the language. And it's going to take me too long to do it.
I could give you a PR review that has the exact language in there and you just hit accept on it. Or not.
You can carry my PR too. I don't care. The PR has been open for such a long time. We have some time before we do the next 1.2 release, but
this is one of those things where I always forget that feature in GitHub exists where I can actually submit changes directly to yours.
does it submit it as a separate commit?
It's up to me when I make the change. It's because you've opened this against here, I think. I have to double check to see if that's set on this. Yeah, maintainers are allowed to edit this pull request. So as a maintainer of the distribution spec, because you've opened this in here, I'm allowed to push changes directly into your branch.
Yeah, you can push us another commit. That's fine.
Attaches my name to it.
Yeah, put your name on it.
And then if you don't like it, you can just say no revert. And that's one of those features that I only used for the first time the other day. I was like, this just feels so wrong that I'm committing directly to someone else's GitHub repo. But that's the way they implement it.
How do you, when you do that, are you doing it on the GitHub UI or are you just doing like a push git at whatever?
I'm doing a direct git push, and then I say the clone repo, the address I'm pushing to is your clone path
Yeah.
and
gotcha.
your branch name. And I use the SSH version of your clone path, but it is all the way down to your repo and your branch name.
Gotcha. Yeah, I started doing it that way before. I used to add a remote and it was such a pain.
Yeah.
But I don't know if I thought the
The GitHub
GitHub
client probably makes
tool
it
does
easier.
it, but I've never used it.
I don't either. Yeah, I only used it for the first time recently because someone submitted a change. I'm like, this is a good first direction, but I need to make a bunch of changes. I figured instead of going back and forth on a PR, it was just easier if I ship directly in there. Cool. Okay, I will do that. And then I think the only maintainer that has put in that he wants changes is Jimmy. So not sure if his review is still pending with other, yeah, because I think a bunch of his stuff is all outdated.
Do I need to update? That PR was open in 2019.
Yeah, I mean,
So
this is a review from back in 2020, I think is where that's picking off from. So we might need to dismiss his stale review to start accepting checks on this if we want to get to the point where we're actually putting some PRs on it, putting some reviews on it. But it'll be cool if this got merged.
yeah, I agree. I'm wondering what we want the time frame for. Well, I don't really care about the releases that much, but other people are gonna ask when we're gonna have a 1.2 release. I
The
don't know if we put
milestone
anything
is
else
on there.
in. We have a milestone for that?
I mean, the milestone is set for this PR to have that on there. What other things do we have in the milestone? That's the question. In the 1.2 milestone,
I mean, I was
got a
waiting to get
handful of
more feedback related to the OCI refer stuff, but I'm not going to be honest, I'm not going to touch it unless somebody really asks me. Somebody comes to me and says, this is important.
John Johnson would like to see some e-tag stuff. That would be fun.
See, that doesn't predate the proxy stuff, but the old stuff.
Yeah, that came back when we were talking about the refers fallback tag, and he was saying, you know, we could solve all these like race conditions if we just add the e-tag support in there, and then you get better confidence that you're making a change on something that hadn't changed out from under you.
Yeah. I agree with that.
I'm looking through the other items in here. Nothing else is really jumping out.
Yeah, everything else was just related to refers, but
The stream blob upload, that one we keep coming back to a whole bunch. We never defined the stream blob upload in the spec.
wasn't there a PR that was attempting to do something like that?
There was a PR that was attempting to rip it out of the conformance test because it wasn't in the spec.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. We need to go the other
Close.
direction. There are a bunch of issues. And so we've had people raise issues, raise questions, everything else in there, but we never actually put in the spec. So I think that's an easy one to say it's time to put this in the spec. So I would say that's a definite 1.2. We need to put that in there because people keep asking and it should be defined. And I think by now we pretty much know how the stream blob upload works, considering it's gone back since the first days of Docker. As far as I've ever known it.
Sounds good. Yeah, I mean, I think scoping it to that stuff would be good because, you know, I prefer defining stuff that's well understood and used. I don't, yeah, if we have that stuff, we can just do the 1.2 release. Anything for the refer stuff, I mean, if we have people using it and feedback coming in, but I don't want to add stuff just to add stuff. Like, want it to be based on either people are working around a problem by doing this or feedback from people trying to use it.
been working for me. I haven't seen people complaining that it's not working with what's going on there now. But I also support the fallback, and so it should be transparent whether they're doing it one way or the other. For the E-tag, if we're leaning heavily on upstream HTTP specifics, and it's a may or a should, we can debate where that is. That should probably be a fairly minimal change. Because we would just say, hey, support this according to the HTTP specs if you can.
Yeah, I don't think anybody's passing these e-tags today that's suddenly going to change in behavior.
I mean, if they're passing it today, they should be passing it according to the HTTP RFCs. And I feel like we're just going to point to those RFCs and say, follow these.
Is there no PR open for this? It's just this discussion.
Just that discussion and well, document conditional request. He does have PR 251. He might have gone into more detail than we want to go into. You know, we've got enough to merge that. I think the only reason I never voted on that one is because I don't have an implementation either way, client or server.
Okay, yeah, we should take another look at it before if we want to get a 1.2 out, then a more not years down the line time frame and take a look at it.
I think it'll be fun to take a PR that's been sitting out there for 4 years now and just hit merge. Be like, surprise, you're in the spec now.
Yeah, how much do you trust? Is it really not been rebased in 4 years? And
That-
GitHub's not complaining about it?
It's not complaining. I think you just add to the right spot of the spec, just a bunch of new lines.
Oh, because it adds a new
New
file
file.
as well.
Well, there
That's
is
why.
the spec itself. Yeah, it's like one small paragraph of conditional requirements. I almost feel like if I was to do it, I would have just said conditional request, refer to this RFC, please support if you can. But he went a little more detail, which I'm not going to be picky about.
Yeah, I'm wondering if it's worth pointing to the RFC directly from the spec rather than from the spec to a doc to the RFC.
The thing that makes me hesitate and want to read this a little more carefully is that within all of this, he says, here's the RFC that defines everything. And then he defines a bunch of, and here's how we use it all over the place. And I worry that's almost setting us up for something to go wrong by defining how to use the RFC. Where if we didn't put all that definition in there and we just said, here's the RFC, please support if you can. If that would make it easier to support and easier to implement and to not misimplement.
Trying to remember what some of the other stuff we added. since the spec, we put all the implementers notes directly in the spec. We didn't have any other. We took out that details document, right? Wasn't there, it used to be some long generated file.
That was, I think, before my time, and it caused a whole bunch of questions afterwards. Like, where did half the spec go?
Yeah. Yeah. But part of that was because we had a spec and then we had a detailed or details of the spec, which which conflicted with the actual spec. So your worry is something similar, where we say, here's the spec, use this RFC, here's more details, and then the details potentially conflict with the RFC.
Either conflict with the RFC or imply here's the only way to implement the RFC, and someone might read just the RFC and be able to come up with a unique implementation that would work, but just not according to our spec because we put more conditions on it. Yeah, we've got in the extra stuff in there, we got a bunch of should and must language that says, hey, if you're doing this API call, you should support this. If you're doing this API call, you must support this. Yeah.
Oh yeah, I see what you're saying. Yeah.
I need to reread it. I want to implement it myself, see how, if there are any funny edge cases when trying to implement it. But otherwise, yeah, this could go in. We could merge it and then make another PR immediately afterwards and say, let's clean this up too. That'd be another way.
True. Yeah, I don't know how much we want that separate document if we're trying to not do that, or if we should just have an implementers note if there's something that's relevant specifically for implementers that doesn't include the should must language.
A thought I've had about redesigning some of the spec verbiage, because I've seen other people who have chimed in and said, hey, the spec is very difficult to read. We've got like 5 layers of headings in there and you can't even tell that something's a heading when you read it on certain pages. Is to just put up top, here are all the RFCs that we need. Did we just lose Derek? We just lost Derek. And he's back. Okay. You back and working again? Derek, you there?
Yeah.
Okay.
What happened?
You dropped for a minute.
Oh, that's weird because I heard you talking and then I just suddenly said recording in progress and came back. Weird.
Weird.
Because I didn't, yeah, I heard you talking the whole time though.
So the thought process I've got is when people have said, hey, we need to simplify this document, the spec doc a little bit to reformat it, make it a little bit nicer. I was thinking take all the stuff in there we need to point out to external HTTP, RFCs, whatever we've got out there we're pointing to. Put just a chunk near the top of the document that just says, hey, we assume that clients either must or should implement these RFCs. And just list a whole bunch of them out. And you know, where, why, maybe some kind of comment beside it, but just not spending a whole lot of time with it, but just kind of point over to, here you go. Implement the put, pull, push, all those HTTP specs, everything else that we require in there, and then add this one in there for the conditional request. Just add a whole bunch of these. And that way it's no longer trying to put this in a whole bunch of other places within the file.
Yeah, I think that makes sense because we've tried to not conflict with the specs wherever we can. And sometimes it's unclear if we do or not. But saying, yeah, these are the ones we implement, and what we're defining here is really just specific meanings of specific meanings and behaviors for HTTP return codes and URL structure.
Yeah. Or JSON error messages or something like that.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I'm fine. I'm fine with that. I mean, if you want to take a stab at it, I'll support you on that.
It's been a long thought process. I've also thought that it would be nicer to reformat the spec around endpoints and less around kind of some kind of logical workflow, but just to say, hey, here's the endpoint, here's the method, here's the parameters that might be passed, here are the headers that need to be passed in, here the headers are passed out, here's the body. And just kind of do per endpoint, just a definition of input output from that. And then maybe a separate document that says, here's the logical workflow of how to use all those endpoints. So if you're trying to do pushing a blob, you're going to call these 3 endpoints and back and forth. And if you ever get lost, here's the other endpoint you'd call to resynchronize. So that someone knows, okay, that's the order of how I need to make the logic of my application. But when I need to define the endpoint, it's just defined in one place and it's one clear jump to that one part of the document.
I feel like that was almost how the was somewhat laid out in the past. Or at least like we had that detail section which like listed per endpoint, but the thing is it didn't go, I guess it was cross-cutting in that it was like, here are the endpoints, here are the return codes, here are the thing, but I think that's might be fine. And then you talk about kind of bringing the implementers notes kind of together at the end almost, and like how to pull, how to push is kind of more in that vein rather than part of the spec.
It would be a whole lot more of an implementer note of here's the logical workflow you would go through to use all these endpoints to implement a client or a server.
I mean, that certainly sounds like a more professional spec, having it laid out like that. That's never been our strong suit.
Joy, there's an opportunity there.
I think you're totes profesh, y'all. But I take your
Yeah.
point.
Profesh. I like it. Yeah, it's a little bit lower on my priority list. My highest priority right now is to get authentication, at least in a point in the working group where we can start thinking about whether or not we want to approve it. And then maybe it'll be a good time to come back and say, let's rephrase a lot of the stuff and make it easier to work with. Yeah, a major rewrite would be interesting. And would probably terrify every maintainer for good reason.
We already
Right.
deleted half the spec once. What's another among friends?
Let's do it again.
We're going to re-add it and then delete it again.
We're going to delete everything that's there and then recreate a whole bunch of other stuff. And none of it lines up. There's no history. There's no way to go back and look at the discussion. Yeah, it's chaos.
Just don't tell John before you do it. I'd like to see his reaction.
Oh, he would have a reaction, that's for sure. So that's all I got. Anybody else have stuff you want to chat about in the last 5 minutes? Carmi, you jumped up there, but that might just be so you can get to the leave button. All right, I'm going to take that as a no. So for everybody over in the US, trying to blow up any vital things that you don't want to blow up tomorrow, and have a good holiday. And we will see you right back here next week.
Hello.
All right, later.
Good day.
Bye.
Cheers.